1972, Lode Lane, Solihull. A vehicle rolls out of the Land Rover factory that looks like a child drew a truck from memory and got everything slightly wrong. The cab sits forward over the engine. The wheels stick out beyond the body like cartoon tractor tires. The whole thing is tall, square, slab-sided, and ungainly in a way that makes experienced soldiers stop and stare. Engineers questioned the proportions. Officers wondered why the Army needed such an awkward machine when the standard Land Rover had served without complaint for 2 decades. One man who climbed into the prototype noted there were 50 ways to cut yourself or bruise your leg getting in. The cockpit was an ergonomic catastrophe. The engine drank fuel like a thirsty diesel locomotive. Its powered trailer prototype flipped the entire vehicle onto its side during testing on a 1-in-3 hill and had to be abandoned entirely. The Army looked at it and accepted it anyway. Over the next 26 years, it would tow Britain's primary field gun across the Falkland Islands, stand watch over the Saudi desert during the Gulf War, carry casualties through the broken roads of Bosnia, listen to Warsaw Pact radio traffic from the East German border, and outlast 2 successive replacement programs that failed so completely the Ministry of Defense had to go back to it and ask for more. Its designation was the Land Rover 101 Forward Control. It was the only purpose-built, dedicated military Land Rover ever made, and it was impossible to replace. To understand why the 101 existed, you need to understand what Britain decided to do with its artillery in 1965. The Army had approved a General Staff requirement for a new gun, a 105mm weapon to replace the aging pack howitzer used by airborne and commando units. That gun would enter service in 1976 as the L118 Light Gun. It would weigh 1,858 kilograms in combat trim, too heavy for the standard Series 3 Land Rover to tow with a 6-man gun crew, ammunition, and ration. A previous attempt at a forward-control military Land Rover had already failed. The Series 2B109, universally described as underpowered and unstable. Britain needed a new vehicle. It had to tow a 4,000-pound gun across any terrain in the world. It had to carry 6 gunners plus driver and commander. It had to fit inside an RAF Andover transport aircraft, and it had to be light enough to be slung beneath a Sea King helicopter. In 1966, Rover at Solihull and the Military Vehicle Engineering Establishment at Chertsey formed a joint design committee. The project engineer they appointed was a draftsman named Norman Busby. He would later be known throughout the industry as Mr. 101. His method for sizing the cab is among the most quotable origin stories in British military engineering. He sat down with a measuring tape. He placed 4 British soldiers, 22 inches wide each, side by side on a workshop floor. Then he added a 10-inch wide spare wheel between them. The result gave him a wheelbase of 101 inches. The vehicle's name was determined by the width of the men who would crew it. The first prototype arrived in summer 1967 with a 3-liter straight-six petrol engine. The Military Vehicle Engineering Establishment tested it and returned a single verdict: underpowered. By December 1968, the prototype had been rebuilt with the ex-Buick 3.5-liter Rover V8 mated to the brand-new LT95 combined gearbox and transfer box. 120 brake horsepower, 176 Lb-ft of torque, permanent 4-wheel drive with a lockable center differential. The numbers told a coherent story. The vehicle weighed 1,924 kilograms empty. It could tow 4,000 pounds. It could ford water, climb a 1-in-3 hill, and turn within a 37-foot circle. Its top speed was officially limited to 75 mph, supposedly to prevent accidents, though every serving soldier knew it would do more. It also drank fuel with spectacular generosity, targeted at 14 miles per gallon on road. In service it returned 6 to 12, and towing a fully laden gun sometimes less. The powered trailer that had been designed to extend the combination into an articulated 6x6 was tested at the Fighting Vehicles Research and Development Establishment and promptly drove the truck onto its side when the trailer kept pushing downhill after the front wheels lost grip. Recovery was achieved by engaging reverse and letting the trailer push the vehicle upright. The Tank Museum holds a photograph of the rollover. The powered trailer was quietly abandoned. The 101 entered production in 1972. By 1982, more than 2,600 had left Solihull. 1,100 had gone to the British Army. The rest were exported, mainly to Australia. The vehicle had been in service for 10 years and had never seen combat. That changed on April 2, 1982. When Argentine forces seized the Falkland Islands, the British task force sailed within days. 3 Royal Artillery formations brought 101s with them: 29 Commando Regiment, Royal Artillery, 4th Field Regiment Royal Artillery, and T Battery of 12 Air Defense Regiment, with 12 Rapier missile launchers, each towed by a 101 tracking radar tractor. Sergeant Steve Brooks's launcher was reportedly operational within minutes of coming off the landing craft. What happened next was the great paradox of the Falklands War. The 101s were deployed in numbers, carried halfway around the world, and were almost never used in their designed role. The reason was the ground. East Falkland was peat bog, diddle-dee scrub, white grass tussock, quartzite stone runs. There were almost no roads outside Stanley. Wheeled vehicles sank to their axles within minutes of leaving a track. Then came the second blow. On May 25th, an Argentine Exocet struck the container ship Atlantic Conveyor. 3 of the 4 British Chinooks on board were destroyed, 6 Wessex helicopters, a Lynx. The heavy lift capacity of the entire task force was gutted in seconds. Only 1 Chinook remained, Bravo November, tail number ZA718 of 18 Squadron RAF, which had been airborne at the moment of the strike. The L118 guns the 101s had been built to tow now flew everywhere as underslung helicopter loads. The 101s themselves sat largely static at the San Carlos beachhead. 16 ambulance variants of 10 Field Workshop Remy ran casualties from the front to the field hospitals. The Rapier tractors stood watch over the bridgehead, missiles live. The most cinematic gun lift of the war came on the night of May 30, when squadron leader Dick Langworthy flew Bravo November alone through a snowstorm with 3 guns of 7 Sphinx battery on board, 2 stuffed inside the fuselage, 1 slung beneath, 22 gunners crammed into the cabin. The landing zone proved to be sloping marsh. The Chinook briefly sank at the rear into peat bog. Argentine mortars opened up. The 101s had carried wounded, defended airspace and supported the bridgehead. Their ground had been the wrong ground, but the vehicle and the crews had survived. By 1990, the 101s returned to their original purpose. Operation Granby sent British forces to the Saudi desert for the liberation of Kuwait. Photojournalists captured Rapier tractors guarding British armored concentrations in January 1991. Missiles live and not drill, the last line of air defense for the formations preparing to move. A small contingent supported 3 commando brigades' deployment into northern Iraq under Operation Haven, protecting the Kurds after the war. Through the 1990s, 101s rolled into the Balkans as ambulances of 24 Field Ambulance, on roads where mines had been laid by every faction in a conflict nobody had fully mapped. And through the entire Cold War, 18 secret variants known as the Vampire stood near the east-west German border under 14 Signal Regiment, their 21-meter telescopic masts unfolding silently in the dark to listen to Warsaw Pact radio traffic. Their work remains partly classified. They were perhaps the most useful 101s ever built, and almost nobody knew they existed. Replacement attempts began in the 1980s. Land Rover proposed the Llama, a Defender 1110-based forward control with a fiberglass cab. 11 prototypes were built between 1985 and 1988. The Ministry of Defense rejected it. Land Rover, fearing it could not compete commercially against the Unimog without a guaranteed military order, killed the project. The ministry's chosen replacement was the Reynolds Boughton RB44, an 846-vehicle contract worth £25 million signed in June 1988. It became one of the most documented procurement disasters in British military history. The brakes failed. In August 1993, REMA testing found that 37 of 57 in-service vehicles veered left under heavy braking at 35 miles per hour. By December 1993, the Quartermaster General declared the entire fleet unfit for road use. Britain had no replacement. The Army turned back to the 101 and ordered the fleet overhauled. Land Rover offered the ministry a comprehensive refurbishment program, re-engine every 101 with a modern diesel, redesign the cab, extend the service life by another decade. The cost would be a fraction of new vehicles. The Ministry of Defense declined. The actual replacement, when it finally arrived in 1995, was the Pinzgauer 716 from Steyr Daimler Puch, the lineal descendant of the Haflinger that Britain had evaluated and rejected in 1966. The vehicle Britain had spent 30 years not buying was now the vehicle Britain had to buy. The 101 was withdrawn from frontline service by the end of 1998. The ambulance variant soldiered on into 1999. On paper, the rivals had always looked superior. The Mercedes-Benz Unimog had portal axles, more torque, and a heavier payload. Britain rejected it as too large for the Andover and not helicopter portable. The American Humvee, when it arrived in 1985, offered crew protection and stability. It also weighed nearly twice as much as the 101 and could not be carried under a Sea King. The French Renault offered better fuel economy from its diesel engine and was less air-portable. The British doctrine was different from all of them. Britain built its army around airborne and commando brigades, vehicles that could be dropped from a Hercules at 800 feet, slung beneath a helicopter, and packed inside transport aircraft with 6 gunners aboard. The 101 paid for that capability with a thirsty engine, a high center of gravity, and a cockpit that gave its crews 50 opportunities to injure themselves. It was the trade-off the Ministry of Defense had chosen in 1966, and it was the right trade-off for the army Britain actually had. The L118 Light Gun that the 101 was built to tow entered service in 1976. It is still in British service today, 50 years later. The vehicle outlasted its gun's early years. The gun outlasted the vehicle entirely. Roughly 700 examples of the 101 survive. The Dunlop collection in Surrey holds the lead truck from the 1975 Trans-Sahara Expedition, Tail End Charlie, which squadron leader Tom Shepard drove from the Atlantic coast to the Red Sea in 81 days. 31 were rebuilt as city cabs for the 1995 Sylvester Stallone film Judge Dredd. One serves coffee from a Help for Heroes mobile cafe in southern England. And on the Falkland Islands today, on the very ground where they sank into peat bog in 1982 and never fired their guns in anger, 101 forward controls remain in everyday use. The vehicle that failed in its designed role on the most famous ground it ever occupied is still working on that same ground 40 years later because nothing that came after it was quite right for the job. 1972, Lode Lane, Solihull. It was boxy. It was top-heavy. It drank fuel by the gallon. The cockpit was a hazard to its own crew. The powered trailer flipped it onto its side. The replacement program it triggered failed so completely that the Army had to keep the original. The Ministry of Defense refused to extend its life when offered the chance, then spent years regretting that decision. And yet it worked. It worked at San Carlos when every other wheeled vehicle sank in the bog. It worked in the Saudi desert, when its Rapier launchers stood watch over Britain's preparation to liberate Kuwait. It worked on the broken roads of Bosnia, carrying the casualties of someone else's war through 3 winters. It works today on the Falkland Islands, on the same peat that stopped it in 1982, still doing the job because the replacement was foreign, and the gun is still British. The Army called it the 120. They abused it without mercy. They loved it without sentiment. You cannot replace something that was built exactly right for the Army that had it. The Ministry of Defense spent 20 years trying to prove that wrong. The 120 spent 20 years proving them wrong instead.